The EITF met on Thursday, March 13th, and discussed 4 issues. One of the issues discussed was Issue 13D, relating to performance conditions that can be achieved after the requisite service period. There are different approaches followed by companies today that could lead to materially different outcomes, depending on which approach is used. I'm Jack Pullman in KPMG's Department of Professional Practice, and I'm here with my colleague Victor Lorenzo. Victor, can you tell us what companies are currently applying today?
Yes, Jack. Thanks. So this is an issue that's very specific and relates to, just to emphasize, relates to awards that permit an employee to benefit from the exercise of options or shares even after the employee is no longer rendering services. So to your question, Jack, the EITF took up this issue because there's diversity in practice. So companies today take a couple of different views. The first view is one that considers the terms of these awards as performance conditions. Under that view, companies do not consider this performance target or contingent event on the determination of the fair value at the grant date. There is a second view, and that second view is the opposite. So companies incorporate this contingent event into the calculation of the fair value on the grant date. So those are the two views that are currently in practice.
Thanks, Victor. So let's just say, for example, if I were a code developer at a software company, and the company gives me a performance award that pays out if the company goes public. If I'm only required to work for 3 years, how would this affect me?
Thanks again, Jack. That's actually a very good example because, I'd like to preface my answer by saying that, that's one of the most common scenarios where you see these types of awards. So situations where companies are planning to go public are a very common scenario. So to answer your specific question, in your case, let's say you received a number of shares that only require you, like you said, to work for a defined period of time, and let's assume that's 3 years. But you are allowed to vest on those shares even if the IPO occurs after, 6 years. Let's just say it occurs in year 5. And let's assume for a second that on the grant date, the fair value of those awards is determined to be, let's just say, $100,000 without consideration of the contingency of the occurrence of the IPO or not. So under View A, in this scenario, no compensation cost would be recognized for your services. And again, this is assuming that the IPO only occurs in year 5. But under the terms of that award, you're still going to receive the shares. However, no compensation cost is recognized during the 3 years that you were providing services to that software company. All of that compensation cost, in this case $100,000, would be recognized in year 5 when the IPO becomes probable. Under the alternative view, the company would probably determine a fair value of the awards that were granted to you that is some amount less than $100,000. There would be some valuation model here to take a haircut from the $100,000 for the fact that there is a contingency as to whether you are going to receive these awards or not. And so let's say that happens to be $70,000. Under that view, a company today would recognize that $70,000 ratably over the 3 years service period that you were working for that employer. So you can see here, again, the highlight of this question and the answer is really that you can see that under one view, no compensation cost is recognized during the time you are working for that company. All of it is recognized outside of the requisite service period. Under the other view, it's all recognized during the time you are providing services to the company.
Thanks, that's interesting. So at the EITF meeting, what was discussed by the task force members on this topic?
That's also a very good question because I think it was interesting to me to witness the level of intellectual discussion in the EITF because there's diversity in practice because there are good arguments for both views. And so, for example, with regards to View A, where, again, it's considered a performance condition, which is what the new guidance proposes, the fair value measurement is very reliable. However, let's go back to your example. You run the possibility of not recognizing any compensation costs during the time that you are working for the company. So there's a mismatch between your providing services to the company and when that compensation cost could be recognized versus the other view, right? So the EITF acknowledged, I guess, the technical merits of both views, but ultimately decided to go with view A because they placed a lot more weight on the concerns around I guess I would say, the unreliability of fair value measurements when an event such as an IPO is, many years out.
Thanks, Victor. So what is the effective date of the proposed guidance, and what happens next?
So the EITF decided on a transition. I'll talk first about the transition approaches, and I'll obviously also discuss the effective date. But the transition approaches are either a prospective approach that would be applicable to all awards outstanding as of the effective date, or, and this is also something I should add here that came as a result of some of the feedback that the ITF received, they decided to also provide for a modified retrospective approach. Under that approach, companies would be allowed to apply this guidance to all outstanding awards as of the earliest period presented upon adoption. And what is the date of adoption here? Well, for public companies, that would be years beginning after December 15 of 2015. So if you're a calendar year company, that's 2016. For private companies, is the same adoption date with respect to annual periods. The only difference here is with respect to interim periods, a private company can adopt that in the year following adoption for annual financial statements. And early adoption would be permitted.
Thanks, Victor.